My name is Alex Rivers. I was 39 years old at the time, a staff sergeant with the 101st Airborne Division, stationed at Camp Dagger in northern Iraq. The heat hovered just above 30 Celsius, and the dust hung in the air like smoke, fine enough to get into your eyes, your lungs, even your thoughts. I had just returned from a night patrol and was sitting on the edge of my bunk, pulling off my boots when I heard the buzz of my phone. One notification, a new message, from Lena. I didn't open it right away. Something in my gut told me it wasn't good. Not the kind of message you smile at. Not the kind you share with the guys while waiting in line at the mess. I stared at the screen, thumb hovering just above the glass, and then finally tapped it. Alex, I filed for divorce. I'm sorry, but this is for the best. I moved the money from our account to mine, and the house is now in my name. I need peace. Tom is living with me. Please don't call. I read it once, then again. Each word hit with the weight of a mortar shell. 4 sentences. 4 cold, lifeless sentences to wipe out 10 years of marriage. And Tom? That had to be Tom Harper, her so-called childhood friend. The same guy who helped us carry boxes when we moved into our second house. The same guy who smiled too much when I wasn't looking, and always seemed to know just a little too much about what was going on in our home. I sat down slowly, the bunk creaking beneath me, and placed the phone on the nightstand. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. There was no anger, not yet, just a strange, creeping cold inside me. Like the kind you get when the adrenaline fades and all that's left is silence. It was almost a relief, like the truth had been waiting behind a curtain, and now someone had finally pulled it aside. The signs had been there. Brief calls that ended too fast. Video chats where she avoided looking at the camera, her eyes darting off screen like she was checking something or someone else. I'd ask questions. She always had answers, quick ones, convincing ones, and I'd believe them because I wanted to, because it was easier than facing the possibility that my life back home was unraveling while I was halfway around the world. There were the banking statements too, numbers that didn't quite add up, transactions she called errors or timing issues, a missing 1,000 here, an unexplained charge there. I chalked it up to miscommunication, to the stress of deployment. I gave her the benefit of the doubt, because I loved her, because I didn't want to believe that the woman I kissed goodbye at the airport could be capable of gutting me from 6,000 miles away. But now it all made sense. Every strange moment, every awkward silence, every excuse wrapped in soft tones. She'd been preparing for this, carefully, deliberately. And the worst part wasn't even the betrayal. It was the calculation, the cold efficiency of it. She had waited until I was most vulnerable, until I couldn't fight back, until I had no way to challenge her. I stared at the text again. Please don't call. That wasn't a request. That was control. She wanted silence, finality, no discussion, no confrontation, no guilt. She wanted to erase me like a name on a whiteboard, but I wasn't the kind of man who disappeared quietly. I wasn't just a soldier. I was a watcher, a reader of patterns, a man trained to track behavior, to analyze threat levels, to act decisively when the moment came. And I knew with absolute clarity that this wasn't just about a marriage ending. This was an ambush, and like any ambush, it could be answered. So I sat there, still in uniform, dust in my hair, sand in the folds of my sleeves, and thought, not about what I'd lost, but about what came next. I rewound the past 8 months like a broken tape reel, each scene flickering into focus with new, bitter clarity. Things that once seemed trivial now screamed of calculated betrayal. Patterns emerged, cold and sharp, and I saw myself moving through them blindly, trusting, distracted, too consumed by the mission ahead to notice the trap forming behind me. Before my last deployment, Lena had insisted that she take over the mortgage paperwork. It'll be easier, she'd said. You'll be focused over there. Let me handle things here. She sounded confident, practical. I didn't argue. I was neck deep in briefings, threat assessments, equipment checks. She handed me a folder. Inside was a simple power of attorney form. I signed it on our kitchen counter, still wearing my boots. my rifle case leaning against the wall. One signature, no questions. I had a flight to catch at dawn. A few weeks later, she called asking if I could transfer a portion of our savings into the joint account. Just to update the kitchen, she said. It's not even a remodel, just paint and some fixtures. I didn't think twice. I logged into the military Wi-Fi portal and moved the money during a lull between patrols. She thanked me, sent pictures of paint samples, light gray, off-white, some kind of marble pattern for the countertops. I remember thinking it looked nice. Then the irregularities began. Credit card alerts for purchases we'd never discussed. Transfers between accounts that I hadn't authorized. I confronted her during a video call, and she answered without hesitation, her voice smooth, almost bored. That was for the contractor, she said. I told you about that. Don't you remember? I didn't. Maybe she had. She always spoke with such certainty, like the truth was a matter of tone rather than fact. She had a way of wrapping logic in emotion, making it hard to breathe, let alone think clearly. Looking back now, it was obvious. The paperwork, the money, the sudden silence in her eyes when we talked. I had dismissed the signs as stress, as distance, as a normal wear and tear on a long-distance marriage. I was wrong. Every one of those signs was a footprint, and they all led to the same place. The moment she gutted me by text. The house was now in her name. The savings were gone. The power of attorney I'd handed her in a rush had become a crowbar to pry open every vault of my life. She had used it to refinance the mortgage, redirect insurance policies, and close my personal investment account. All of it done legally, all of it backed by my own signature. I wasn't just robbed. I had handed them the map and the keys. And I say them because I no longer believe Lena had done this alone. She was a master manipulator when it came to emotion, but she wasn't wired for fraud. She didn't know her way around contracts or escrow or the intricacies of VA loan benefits, but Tom Harper did. Tom had worked in real estate for over a decade. He knew the back doors in the system, the shortcuts, the paperwork that slid through unnoticed. And then there was Justin Quinn, a name I barely remembered at first. He had shown up at one of our barbecues 2 years ago. Quiet, polite, unnerving. Financial consultant, Lena said. Something about helping veterans build long-term portfolios. I didn't like him then. Something about the way he looked around, like he wasn't visiting but casing the place. I shook his hand and forgot about him. Now I couldn't forget. A few messages I'd intercepted, some open source digging through LinkedIn and local news databases, and suddenly it made sense. Quinn had recently settled a quiet investigation, unlicensed consulting, predatory lending practices. Nothing stuck, but the smoke was thick. And where there's smoke, there's usually fire. I could see the outline of the operation now. Lena was the soft approach, emotional leverage. Tom was the insider, knowledge of property law, refinancing, and the VA system. And Justin, he was the architect. He built the funnel, knew how to make the numbers disappear. Together they had a strategy, a way to target soldiers who were gone long enough to be blind, who loved deeply enough to be naive, and who had just enough assets to be worth the trouble. And I was the prototype, the first field test. Maybe not the first victim, but definitely the one they thought wouldn't come back asking questions. They miscalculated. I wasn't just another soldier. I was trained to detect patterns, to find seams in enemy tactics, to exploit weakness when it revealed itself. And now they had shown me theirs. Not directly, but through arrogance, through the assumption that I'd stay silent, broken, and thousands of miles away. They took 8 months to set the trap. I would take whatever time was needed to tear it apart, step by step, person by person, brick by brick. I landed in the States 10 days after receiving the letter. No family waiting, no banners, no welcome home parade. That was by design. I told no one I was coming, not my command, not my neighbors, not even my brother in Raleigh. I wore plain civilian clothes, rented a beat-up gray sedan at the airport under a different name, and swapped in a prepaid SIM card I'd bought at a kiosk near the gate. I didn't want to be seen, not yet, not until I was ready. Charlotte looked the same from a distance. Same skyline, same traffic, same air thick with pollen and humidity. But something had shifted beneath the surface. Or maybe it was me. The streets I used to know felt narrower. Every neighborhood looked like a stage set, propped up to disguise the rot underneath. My house, our house, sat at the end of a cul-de-sac in a quiet subdivision with trimmed lawns and identical mailboxes. I'd bought it with the dream of stability, of roots. Now it stood like a monument to betrayal. There was a new car in the driveway, a black Tesla. I never owned one, neither did Lena. But Tom Harper, according to his LinkedIn, was now senior associate broker at Southeast Homes Realty and proudly posted a picture of his new Model 3 just 2 weeks ago. The plate matched. He was living there, in my house. The curtains were drawn. I didn't approach, didn't knock. I just sat across the street for a few minutes, engine off, watching. My name was still technically on the deed, but I wasn't about to test that line. This wasn't going to be a war won with broken windows and bruised knuckles. This was chess. Long game. My first real move was in Atlanta. Eddie Rios, a guy I served with during my first tour in Afghanistan, had since traded fatigues for suits. He ran a small legal practice out of a modest office tucked between a bail bondsman and a soul food restaurant. Eddie had always been sharp, detail-oriented, the kind of guy who memorized field manuals for fun. Now he handled everything from divorce to financial fraud. I called him from a burner number and met him in person the next morning. No handshakes, no small talk. I laid it all out. Lena, the forged refinance, the missing funds, the sudden legal authority she'd wielded like a scalpel. Eddie sat silently for most of it, flipping through a manila folder I'd prepped with timelines, screenshots, and banking summaries. When I finished, he leaned back, lips pursed. His expression had changed. Not disbelief, he'd seen worse, but the look of a man who just spotted the outlines of a bigger picture. "This isn't just a divorce, Alex," he said quietly. "This is a racket. And if you're right about Tom and this Quinn guy, we could be looking at federal charges, wire fraud, identity theft, exploitation of active duty personnel." I felt something shift in my chest. Not relief exactly, but confirmation. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining things. We got to work. Eddie knew people who could discreetly pull public records and scrub digital footprints without triggering alerts. I filed formal requests for all banking activity tied to the joint account and my own personal savings. We combed through refinance documents, tracing IP addresses and notary stamps, and we found it. The power of attorney, signed by me, was used 3 weeks after I deployed to initiate a refinance that redirected all equity into an account under Lena's name. The trail led straight to Tom's firm. He had been the listing agent for the new buyer, a shell entity that turned out to be nothing more than a legal facade to shift ownership before transferring it back to Lena. But that wasn't all. Lena had done this before. Twice. Buried in property records and loan applications were 2 other cases, one in Fayetteville, one in Pensacola. Both involved military families. Both involved women with recently granted power of attorney, and both homes had been refinanced, sold, and reacquired within a 4-month span. The signatures were different, the tactics slightly varied, but the consultant listed in both transactions, Justin Quinn. It was a pattern, one just hidden enough to avoid notice, but clear once you knew where to look. I reached out to the other 2 men. It wasn't easy. One Staff Sergeant Nathan Ellis was living in a trailer park outside Mobile, Alabama. He'd lost his leg to an IED in Helmand and barely spoke above a whisper. The other, Corporal Brian Keller, suffered from untreated PTSD and had been bouncing between VA appointments and court dates over missed child support payments. Both were hesitant at first, suspicious, burned by the system and slow to trust another uniform, even one with familiar scars. But I showed them the documents, showed them the links, the same names, the same signatures, the same fake accounts. Slowly the walls came down. Brian cried when he realized he wasn't alone. Nathan said only one thing: they picked the wrong bastards this time. By the end of the week, I had allies, survivors of the same silent ambush, men who'd been gutted by paperwork and pretty words instead of bullets. And together we had a target, not just revenge, not just justice, We had a mission. Lena didn't know a thing. She believed I was still half a world away, stuck in the dust and heat of Iraq, broken and distracted. That was her advantage, she thought. Distance, time. She likely assumed I was too overwhelmed, too caught up in my own misery to notice the cracks forming around me. Tom, on the other hand, probably believed I'd spiral into rage or helplessness, maybe even give up. He underestimated the discipline the military instills. And Justin Quinn, he was the kind of man who had been getting away with too much for too long. Smooth, self-assured, untouchable. He dressed like a stockbroker, smiled like a politician, and moved like a man who'd never heard the word consequence. But we weren't rushing in. We didn't scream. We didn't threaten. We didn't give them a target to prepare for. Instead, we moved in silence. Precision over noise. Every step carefully calculated. Every action layered with deniability. The first move was subtle. Eddie filed for an immediate freeze on the most recent property transfer involving my house, citing an ownership dispute. That triggered a legal review, which put the brakes on any pending resale or financial restructuring. It bought us time. Quiet time. Meanwhile, I reached out to a contact I had from my last deployment, a Marine named Sheila Ward, who now worked with the Department of Veterans Affairs. She'd spent the last few years reviewing VA home loan audits, looking for fraudulent patterns in real estate dealings. I didn't tell her everything, just enough to make her curious. She agreed to initiate a low-profile internal review into the past 3 transactions involving Lena and Tom's firm. No flags raised yet, just a whisper through official channels. At the same time, Eddie helped me start the paperwork to contest the original refinance. We submitted documents to request handwriting analysis on the power of attorney form and the mortgage authorization, all under the radar. No notices to Lena, no formal charges, just a slow tightening of the noose. I kept tabs on their social media. Lena posted pictures of beach weekends, brunch with Tom, a couple's getaway to Asheville. Her captions were light, full of hashtags about healing and growth. The irony wasn't lost on me. She thought she had cut ties cleanly, surgically. In reality, she'd left fingerprints all over the scalpel. Tom had gone quieter. His realty website still featured client success stories, but his personal accounts were locked down. He was careful. He likely felt a slight shift in the wind, but didn't know where it came from. That's how I wanted it. Unease without clarity, doubt without direction. Justin was the most open. Arrogantly so. His Twitter feed was full of vague, inspirational quotes about success, taking risks, and beating the odds. He posted selfies in front of sleek downtown buildings, shaking hands with clients in designer suits. I saved everything. I was building a narrative, brick by brick. Then the report came back from the handwriting expert. It wasn't just forged, it was poorly done. The signature on the power of attorney was traced, the pressure uneven, and the baseline slanted in a way completely inconsistent with my authentic signature. Worse for them, the notary stamp used belonged to a woman who'd been out of the country on vacation during the date listed on the form. That changed everything. Eddie grinned when he read the results. That's fraud, Alex. Black and white. We can move. But I wasn't ready to blow the whole operation yet. The truth was, I didn't just want to win. I wanted the full picture. I wanted to understand how many others they'd hurt, how far this scheme had reached. We had the beginnings of a pattern, but 3 victims wasn't enough to prove enterprise fraud. So we kept digging. Eddie filed for subpoena rights to access the digital records of the realty firm's internal communications. Through a third party, we contacted a legal tech group that specialized in recovering metadata and timestamps from cloud-based documents. I didn't understand all the technical jargon, but I didn't need to. I trusted the mission, and I trusted the people I'd pulled into it. Lena still had no idea. As far as she knew, she'd won. I was silent. No angry calls. No request for explanations. Just silence. That, I learned, was the most powerful weapon I had. It left her comfortable, overconfident. She wasn't covering her tracks anymore. She wasn't planning for a return fire. She didn't see it coming when I filed the formal complaint with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. The case packet included everything: forged documents, notarization inconsistencies, testimony from the other 2 veterans. a timeline of financial manipulation and connections to known bad actors like Quinn. It took hours to organize, days to perfect. Eddie delivered it in person, straight to the federal office in downtown Atlanta. That was the moment the silence ended. Not for them, no, they still didn't know they'd been hit, but for the system, for the machine that had looked the other way too long, the noise had begun, and it was my voice leading the charge. Tom tried to make contact the moment he found out the account had been frozen. At first, his message came through in a casual tone, feigned politeness, an attempt to maintain the illusion of professionalism. He wrote as if this was all a misunderstanding, a technical hiccup, something we could resolve quietly. When I didn't respond, his tone changed. The second message was angrier, more desperate. There were veiled threats about legal action, mutual destruction, how dragging this out would only hurt us both. I deleted it without blinking. What Tom didn't know was that I was already close, physically close. I was 10 miles from his office in Marietta when he tried to move funds through a third-party escrow firm. Eddie had anticipated the maneuver and filed a provisional injunction based on the fraud report we'd submitted to FinCEN. The transfer was intercepted midstream. The funds never made it out. By the time he realized what had happened, his personal and business accounts were frozen pending investigation. That was when it hit them. I was back. I wasn't in some bunker overseas or on a dusty base in the Middle East. I was here watching, working, pulling threads one by one. Lena sent the first email in over 3 months. It was long and filled with all the usual tactics, regret, half apologies, emotional pleas. She wrote about confusion, about pressure, about how she never meant for it to go this far. She said she missed me, that she had made mistakes, that Tom had misled her, that Justin was the real manipulator. There was even a line about wanting to fix things for us. I read it like a scene from a soap opera, so predictable it was almost insulting. I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded it to Special Agent Ramirez, the federal investigator now overseeing the case. Meanwhile, our case was gaining momentum. Ramirez had started interviewing the other victims. One of them, Sergeant Felix Turner, had been too ashamed to come forward before. He'd lost his home, his savings, and was living in a shared rental across town. When he heard someone else was fighting back, he stepped up. His affidavit added weight to our claims and showed a clear pattern of predation. Eddie coordinated with local authorities and the VA's Office of Inspector General. A joint task force was forming, one that treated this not as a domestic dispute, but as a coordinated financial fraud targeting veterans. That changed the narrative. It wasn't just about my house anymore. It was about dozens of homes, dozens of men and women in uniform. We subpoenaed communications between Tom and Justin. Emails surfaced, careless, damning. In one exchange, Tom joked about flipping another uniform before a deployment window closed. Justin responded with laughing emojis and a link to a luxury condo in Tampa. There were spreadsheets, lead lists, even referral fees. Lena's name came up more than once, not just as a participant, but as someone who softened them up. It all pointed to something bigger than betrayal. It was exploitation disguised as affection, fraud wrapped in intimacy. Then came the court hearing. Not the final trial, but the preliminary injunction conference. A place to show just enough evidence to justify continued freezes and possible criminal charges. They came together. Lena and Tom sat side by side at the defendant's table, like two teenagers caught shoplifting, dressed in their Sunday bests, but unable to hide the panic under their collars. Their lawyer was a mid-tier Atlanta name, the kind who usually handled messy divorces and foreclosure delays. He flipped through papers nervously, whispering furiously to Tom, whose face was pale and tight. Across the courtroom, I sat quietly with Eddie and Agent Ramirez. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. Justin wasn't there willingly. He had been brought in from federal custody, wearing a suit that didn't quite hide the handcuffs tucked beneath the long sleeves. He looked tired, less cocky, though the smirk was still there. A habit, not a feeling. The judge reviewed the documentation. Notarized forgeries, bank statements, falsified VA loan applications, communications, and sworn testimonies. When he spoke, his tone was flat, procedural, but the weight of his words was unmistakable. He granted the full freeze of all assets connected to the defendants pending criminal proceedings. He approved the continuation of the federal probe, and he ordered Lena and Tom to surrender their passports. Tom slumped forward in his chair. Lena didn't move. She just stared ahead, blinking slowly, as if waiting to wake up from a bad dream. I didn't look at them when we left the courtroom. I didn't need to. Step by step, they were walking into the trap they built for others, and I was walking them there. 3 months had passed. The sun was bright in the morning sky, casting long shadows over the driveway of the house, that after everything was once again officially mine. The place looked different now, stripped of its former warmth. Lena had sold almost all the furniture, though it didn't matter. The walls, the floors, the foundation were still here, and that was all I needed. I was starting over. The FBI continued its investigation. The list of victims had grown significantly as more and more soldiers came forward, each one offering pieces of their own shattered stories. What had once been a quiet conspiracy, operating under layers of secrecy, was now falling apart piece by piece. The silence, the invisible force that had held everything in place, shattered when one person had decided to stand up and fight back. When I made the choice to not let it slide, I unknowingly gave others the courage to do the same. I stood there in the middle of the yard, staring at the house. The overgrown grass, the cracked concrete of the driveway, it all felt so familiar, yet so distant, as if someone else had lived here, someone who didn't know how to hold on, someone who didn't know the value of perseverance. I didn't need to be here. I could have sold the house, moved away, erased everything about the past 3 years. But I didn't. I didn't leave because I wasn't done yet. The house was a symbol, a place where everything had fallen apart, but also where it would be rebuilt, one piece at a time. Why hadn't I just walked away? Why hadn't I just left her and everything behind? That was the question everyone kept asking when they heard about my decision. Friends, colleagues, hell, even Eddie asked me once. I gave them all the same answer, and it was simple. I was a soldier. I didn't shoot first. I didn't throw punches unless I was sure they were coming. But if you hit me, you better believe I'm going to fight back. Calmly, by the book, to the very end. That was what I'd learned through the years the hard way. You don't just give up, not when you've been pushed too far. And Lena had pushed too far. So had Tom. So had Justin. They thought they could play their game, control everything behind the scenes without consequence. But they didn't count on me. I hadn't just let them steal from me. I'd let them believe they could get away with it. Now they would feel every consequence, one by one, and there would be no escape. No easy way out. Inside the house, there was a new quietness. It wasn't the oppressive silence that had hung over it for so long when Lena was still here, when I'd felt the walls close in on me. This silence was different. It was the calm before a storm. I could feel the pieces falling into place. Things were moving forward, and soon it would be time for everything to come to a head. I didn't need to rush it. Justice wasn't about speed. It was about precision, and precision took time. I could hear the faint hum of traffic in the distance. The world was moving on, while I stood still, waiting, watching, but not idle. Never idle. Every step I had taken so far had been deliberate, and every step going forward would be too. The investigation was gaining traction, the paperwork was being processed, and the noose was tightening around Lena, Tom, and Justin. But the battle wasn't over yet, not by a long shot, and in the meantime, I rebuilt. It wasn't the grandiose, dramatic start-over that people always envisioned. There was no grand moment of triumph, no sudden, loud declaration that everything had been made right. It was just the work, the small, quiet moments where I could look at the house and know that I was on my terms now. The house was just a house, but it represented something else. It was a reminder of everything I had fought for and everything I had lost. The quiet moments gave me the space to plan, to think, to work. Every morning I woke up, stepped into the kitchen, and brewed a cup of coffee. I didn't rush through the motions. I didn't forget that there was more to do. I had learned to appreciate the small victories, and that morning, with the sun shining and the air crisp, I knew it was time for the final step. Soon enough, Lena, Tom, and Justin would have to face everything they had tried to cover up. And when the dust settled, when everything was laid bare, they would see that I wasn't just a soldier. I was a man who didn't walk away from his battles. I faced them head on, and I won.